Good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming. Some of you don't know who I am, some of you do, so I thought I'd start with a little introduction after a prayer, a simple prayer for Yahweh's leading. We thank you, Yahweh, for the teaching that you give us and the guidance, direction, and teaching that you give us. And pray that tonight, as always, we would ask you to help our minds to focus and to concentrate and to open our spirit to your teaching. And above all, in the areas where we may have disagreement, to have peace and to come together in unity. In the name of Messiah Yahshua, we pray. Hallelujah. Well, when I was asked to talk about new moons, I thought, well, this will be easy. I've been doing this for a few years, and I'll just give my experiences with people who have been sending me emails and helping me with this new moon report that I do on my website for years now, and share with you what people tell me, what they do, why they do it, because they certainly tell me if they don't agree with me. I get interesting emails, and that's good. You know, I mean, if I find I'm wrong about something, or if I get a different perspective on it, then I change it, and I've done that on my website over the years. So I want to say thanks, first of all, to everybody that has helped and is helping, sends me new moon reports, because if you don't send reports, then we don't have a new moon report website. So I really appreciate it, and it's a lot of fun to meet people who I've communicated with for years and never met them face to face. And they'll walk up to me and tell me their name, and of course that I recognize the name, and we have a good time in fellowship face to face after all those years. Elder Vaca called me an expert this morning. I kind of shook a little. And you know, after all, what is an expert? And I got to thinking, well, you know, a good student studies and then works on the subject, and as the years go by, you learn from doing. And if you stick with it long enough, you learn a lot more, and then you can help other people learn, and then they come to you and think you're an expert, but because you're just a few steps ahead of them. So that's what it is. It's learning by doing and getting better at it, and continuing to learn as people give you new information, new perspectives, and you keep an open mind about things, and new technologies, of course, come along. Then I guess you become an expert. I was thinking about, I wanted to share with you how I started looking for new moons. When I first came to the name of Yahweh and understood that our Creator had a name, I was learning so much so fast, and the calendar was one of the things that I had to deal with. And being someone who's interested in detail, I decided I would start to try to build my own calendar, and that's kind of what got the new moon sighting started. And then people were communicating with me and saying, gee, you're out in Arizona and the sun shines most of the time, so you're going to see the moon a lot more frequently than some of us, where rain and overcast can last for days. So I thought, gee, I almost have an obligation to do this because of the skies being so clear in the Southwest so frequently during the year. And so I was really motivated to learn how to do this. In the beginning, I had found some software, but I wasn't confident in the software because I wasn't familiar with it. So I began on what people used to do when there was no software. And I would go out, and my wife and kids would go with me, and we would take some homemade paraphernalia with us, and I'll describe what it was. I made a big protractor. It was about this big. You know what a protractor is? It has the angles on it for about 90 degrees. And we would take 2 folding chairs out into the desert north of us where we could see a good view of the horizon. And I took a 4-foot carpenter's level, and I laid it across the 2 folding chairs when they stood up. And then I taped the protractor to the side of the 4-foot level, and then we'd wait to see the moon. And then when we'd spot it, I'd get down low and put my eye on the end of the 4-foot level, and I'd have one of the kids hold a string up to the moon, and I'd sight it along the protractor and read the degrees. And then I'd write that down, and then I'd go back and see if that's what the computer software was telling us, to see if it was correct. And then I got a compass out to see if the azimuth, the compass direction, was correct. And I did this for about 2 years, checking the software until I became confident that the software was accurate. And it was amazingly accurate. The other thing that the software required was latitude and longitude, which I didn't know how to find that for that particular spot, so we just took someplace close by. And most of the people who give reports are generally going to give you the city they're in, and you can get the latitude and longitude for the city, but not the specific site or place where you're standing. So I used a local airport, which was the Scottsdale airport, and the software also required elevation, and so I could get the elevation from the airport. And anyway, that's the way I started doing it, and became confident that the software was giving me good information. So you can sight new moons without computers, and you can do a very good job of it, and there's lots of other little details that, like getting the angles and checking it, that you could do. You know, if you want to, you could do it. It's possible with just very simple homemade tools. So I think we'll begin with my, after that little introduction, and we'll begin with the slides. I have at the bottom of this my website, thetruthofyahweh.org. I started that in about 1995. The page with the new moon reports, of course, is the most active part of the website. And so we spend a lot of time on it. I say we, my wife, of course, helps me with this on certain days when I might be stuck at work or on the highway as the time the moon's setting. Things do get kind of cramped up in schedules in our lives nowadays, so it's great when you have a spouse who can help you do the things that you've got yourself involved in so you can keep going, because there's so many people now have become so dependent, I should say, upon us doing this. So I thought about what will I talk about, how, why, and other questions. This is just a general topic. And I thought, since I don't know how much everybody knows about the moon itself, that I'd go through a little bit of science, some new moon science, how to sight a new moon with and without computer software. Then talk about what did they do centuries ago when they didn't have technology like we do today. Then I'll cover what's being done currently, and that's basically from what feedback I get from people on how they're doing things, and some methods that we, and probably none of us in here use, but they're still out there, and I'll discuss those, and the reasons why the people do it, or the reasons they give for why they do it. And then I'm going to talk about halakha, which is a Hebrew word which means walking it out. What that means is figuring out how we're going to deal with something where there's not a clear, literal direction, and thereby gives us different points of view. If it was clear, there wouldn't be any disagreement. And I'll talk more about that, too, at the end of this list of topics. So some general moon science. The conjunction is when the Earth and the moon and the sun are on a straight line, which in this diagram is represented by that horizontal line. The sun isn't on it right now in this diagram, but if it was, you would have no way to see the moon, because the moon would be black and it would blend with the black sky, and that's called a conjunction. That's when they're in alignment. You'll notice in this diagram that the sun on the right side is just slightly below that line. It's now not in alignment, and it's more because the moon is moving, not the sun. But in this diagram, just for a representation of what creates a crescent, you can see that as the sun moves off that line with the other two objects, the Earth and the Moon, that the white part starts to drift over to one side. And if it drifts just enough for you to be able to see the edge of that white area when you're standing on the Earth, then you're going to see a crescent. And that's our new moon crescent. It's just a simple understanding. But the moon cycles are not simple. And that's what makes it necessary to have complicated tables of data, which amazingly were done thousands of years ago. There were some very patient, dedicated men who spent their lives, must have spent their whole life writing down the numbers and probably little homemade devices like I described. And then when they died, someone else picked up the work, and they ended up discovering different nuances and different characteristics of the cycle to find out that this was not a simple orbit. The lunar cycle is not simple, as it says there. It's called the Metonic cycle. Metonic is a name. A fellow's name was Meton. About 400 BC, he discovered this. So that's a while ago. That there are 235 lunar months in this cycle, which is 19 solar years, before it begins to repeat itself. So even myself, with writing down and keeping notes, I haven't done this for 19 years yet, maybe about 14 or 15, so I haven't even seen a complete lunar cycle myself. So I have to depend upon information that other people before me wrote down and made available through their writings. You can see that this orbit is not a circle on the right side of the diagram there, that this orbit that the moon makes around the Earth is not a circle, it's an ellipse. It's larger on one side than it is on the other. This elliptical orbit, if you look at the right side, the distance from the Earth in the center to the right side of the circle is the shortest portion. That's called perigee. That's about 363,000 miles. And on the left side, when the moon is on that part of the elliptical orbit, it's 385. So there's a difference of about 40,000 miles in this orbit being off-center on the Earth. And that makes it very different from our perspective, how we see the moon move, compared, for example, to having a model on a desk where you can move it around and look at it from the outside. When you're on one of these spheres watching it happen, there are some visual differences that occur that aren't apparent unless you're making measurements. For example, we see, and everybody knows that we only see one side of the moon. It turns and always keeps the same side to us. But technically that's not true, completely that's not true. Because of this elliptical orbit, there are times when the moon, as it goes around, is shifting off into that elliptical orbit where we can peek around the edge just a few degrees. And when it comes around the other side, the same thing. So if someone was starting to look and study very seriously, they'd get shocked and say, well, oh, you know, I thought I couldn't see around that edge. And they would discover that they could a little bit. The only reason I mentioned it is to support the statement that this is not a simple orbit. Relationships are not simple. And this is something that I don't know if a lot of people know, but it's a shocker. The synodic month, which is in the second bullet there, is 29.5 days. That's what we see if we look up at the moon and we wait for it to come around again to the next crescent. It's going to be an average of 29.5 days. And we see it this way because of that elliptical orbit. If we were to be out in space on a spaceship and we watched and we counted the moon go around the Earth, it would only take 27.3 days. Sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? That's called sidereal month. You're off to the side and it's real. What we're seeing on the Earth is affected by this orbit, this non-circular or elliptical orbit. And I only mention this, again, not to get into detail, but just to show you that it's a complex set of numbers that make up this orbit. This is simple phases of the moon, which everybody is aware of. The yellow lines on the left of the screen is the sun rays, and you can see the Earth in the center there is lit up halfway. And the moon, when it's to the left, is going to be in its new moon phase. And when you get down to the lower left, the crescent, and we see the new moon crescent, and then in the 6 o'clock position, you're going to see a half moon, and so on until you get round to the full moon on the opposite side. If you want to have some fun and really learn about the moon's cycles, and some of you have already done this, I know, because you've talked to me about it, just go out the same time every night from the time you see the first crescent. So at the new moon, you see the crescent, and you'll be out at sunset, and then go out the next night at sunset, and the next night at sunset, and the next night at sunset. And what you'll see is the moon migrating across the sky, and the crescent will get bigger and bigger and bigger until it's about 90 degrees from where it started, looking about south from where I am when I look at it, and it'll be a half moon, and then it'll grow and grow and grow until it's behind you in the east, and it'll be visible finally as a full moon. And while it's doing that, the crescent, if you think in your mind what you see, it's always on the right side, isn't it? And as it grows, it's on the right side, and then the half moon is on the right side, and then it gets to be a full moon. Well, then I discovered that an easy way to follow, now that's 2 weeks of the 4 weeks. And I discovered that if you get up in the morning on the second 2 weeks, before sunrise, and you look to the west, you'll see the full moon still there. And then you do the same thing. For the next 2 weeks, you go out at the same time, just before sunrise, and you watch that moon, and it'll do the same thing. It'll migrate across the sky until it's a half moon. But the light is on the other side. Instead of it being on the right, it's going to be on the left. So all the time you're watching it in the morning, as it comes across, the lit up side is on the left side of the moon. And then finally, you're going to get where you have a thin crescent on the left side of the moon just before sunrise, and you'll barely be able to see it because the sun is starting to come up and it's getting so bright you can barely see the crescent. And then the next day you go out and you can't see the crescent because the sun comes up too soon for you to see that last little bit of the old moon at the end of the 4th week. And then that's when you'll have about a day or two, depending on the season, of seeing no moon, and then you'll have your new crescent and your new moon, and you start all over again. So that's basically a kind of a fun way to follow, if you have the time to follow the moon for a whole month, and you get the feel of being kind of connected, more connected with Yahweh, more connected with with nature and the way he made the earth and the moon and the things that are part of our world. Once you do that a couple of times, you'll be able to go out any time of the day or night when there's a moon, look up at it and say, well, it's on the light is on the right, or the light's on the left, and it's in this place in the sky, and you'll know exactly where you are in the month. And that's how familiar these people became with the moon back in those days, because they used it for their agriculture. And they could look up and they knew what month, what week they were in. So we don't do that today. Too many people do that today in our world. But it's a nice thing to experience and to really feel close to creation. So I suggest you try that. Now, how to sight a new moon without a computer, the way it was done for thousands of years. In this diagram, the sun is on the right and it's still up above the horizon, and the moon is on the left and it's still up above the horizon. And so the statement, if both the sun and the moon are above the horizon, it's too bright to see the moon before it sets. You're just blinded by the sun. And the moon crescent is pretty faint in the beginning of the month, so it's going to blot it out. So in that condition, you won't see it. At the same time, you're counting, if you don't have a computer and you're doing it like they did it for thousands of years, you're counting the days on your calendar or a piece of paper, however they did it. Today you would do it on the calendar just as a learning experience until you get to 29. And you're going to say, well, you know, I'm going to see it on 29 or I'm going to see it on 30 because it doesn't go to 31 and you won't see it on 28. It's a 29.5-day cycle, so it's got to be between those 2 days. So you go out and you look until you see it, whether you see it on the 29th day or the 30th day. And the ideal situation is what you see here in the diagram. The sun is below the horizon. It has set. The moon is still not set. And you can see that little white crescent that we talked about just a moment ago on the right side because the sun is shining up from behind the horizon and still hitting the moon, and we can see it. That's a classic situation where you see it. And it's usually, the moon is usually within 5 degrees horizontally to wherever the sun sets. So when I did this early on, I would go out there before the sunset, watch where the sun set, and make a mental note with a tree or some mountain or something on the horizon, say, okay, the sun set just next to this, and I memorize that spot, and then I wait until it gets dark enough. And I don't have to look all over the sky. I only have to look within about 5 degrees of where the sun set, and I will find the moon. I just look up and down within that area until it gets dark enough for the crescent to be visible. So the sun has to set before the moon sets, and this is one of the parameters that we'll talk about a little bit later on how much time has to be between the sunset and the moon set for the sky to be able to get dark enough so it doesn't blot, the light doesn't blot out the crescent. Now, what did they do years ago if you had cloudy days? They'd go out and look on the 29th day and it's cloudy, can't see the sky. They go out on the 30th day and it's cloudy, they can't see the sky. Well, the tradition and the law of the Sanhedrin back in the days of biblical Israel, days of Israel, was that if they couldn't see it on the 29th, the 30th day would be it, whether they saw it or not, because they know it's not going to go to the 31st day. So if they didn't see it on the 29th and they went out on the 30th and it was visible, that was the day. It might have been visible on the 29th, but they don't know because of the clouds. So they would say, okay, we'll take the 30th. So in Yahweh's rules, there is no rule that says you have to see the new moon exactly when it's possible to see the new moon in your area, or something terrible is going to happen. If you can't see it on the 29th and you see it on the 30th is the day. If you don't see it at all on both days, the 30th is the day, is the way it was done. And so as far as our astronomical accuracy, of course, that would have been off occasionally, but it wasn't that important. Now, how to predict, and I use the word predict rather than to sight a new moon, because you don't sight a new moon with software. You predict it with software. You still have to go out and see it. I mean, the way we believe it, you do. You want to be able to be a witness. With software, there are a lot of programs out there that'll give you the new moon cycles, some religious and some strictly astronomy, and they all will give you good information. Some will give you more usable information for our purposes than others. So, and many programs will allow selections of different dates and times, so you can go forward, you can go backward, and see what would have happened on a certain date, what will happen on a certain date. Some programs go back over 1,000 years. You can see where a moon was on a certain date and go forward the same way. Not too many programs, on the second statement here, not too many programs, but a few will allow you to add locations to the database. What that means is this: you can get a program and it'll have 100 cities around the world, and that's it. So if you're not near one of those cities, you're not going to get information that's that pertinent to your sighting, because things vary, especially with elevation. There is one program that we're going to talk about that most of you have probably heard of and some of you actually use, which does allow you to add new locations to the database, and that's the one I use, and that's fantastic because if someone writes to me, and they have, saying, well, I'm out in a rural area of Montana and the nearest city is 50 miles away and I don't know what my elevation is, and I'm trying to help them by telling them where to look, because I'll do that. I'll get into the software and I'll put in all the data I can get them to give me so that I can tell them exactly where and when to look and what their probabilities are for seeing the new moon. And it's a lot of fun. And a lot of these people are very appreciative, and I've made friends with a lot of people. You know, currently I have somewhere between 80 and 100 people that regularly send me reports from around the world. And we don't talk that much. We don't have to. We just send little sentences back and forth, but we know each other and feel kind of close after years of doing this together. And I can help them in the beginning when they're first learning by getting the information of their location. And this is more currently made possible by people having a GPS. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, continue with using software. The program that I'm using the most, and I've used 3 different programs, is this MoonCalc 6. 6 is the current version, which has not been edited for now probably 4 years. I think this is about 4 years old. I'm hoping that the fellow that wrote this will come up with a Windows program, because this is in DOS, so you have to run a DOS screen on top of your Windows to do this, which means your mouse doesn't work and you got to use keys and that sort of thing. You can add new databases. Several criteria can be used to adjust for false positives. What that means is when you get this program, and it's free, you can download it free online. When you get this program, there's a default setting for everything, of course, but there are some criteria of different scientists who have put data in there on when you're going to see this moon. There's actually 12, I think there's currently 12 different criteria. And what that means is this: some fellows will say, okay, well, if it's this many degrees above the horizon and there's this many minutes from sunset to moonset, you'll see it or you won't see it. Excuse me. Some of those programs will give you a false positive. It'll say you're going to see it, you won't see it, and vice versa. The criteria that's defaulted on this program is the best one to use. The scientist from Britain named Yallop put it together, and it will give you the least number of false positives. So if it says you're going to see it, you're probably going to see it, given clear skies. If it says you're not going to see it, you're probably not going to see it. There, on the bottom statement there, I wrote, as few as 4 values can help give accurate predictions if you have kept records of past sightings. And I'm going to give you those numbers, the numbers that I spent years getting. They're my gift to you tonight. As you watch, for example, the elevation of the moon on the night you saw it at sunset, it'll generally run somewhere around 8 degrees above the horizon, sometimes more, sometimes less, and we'll see that in a moment. So what I tried to do was keep records and look for what is the lowest elevation above the horizon that I have spotted the new moon. Now, I've heard people tell me years ago, oh, you can't see it if it's below 8 degrees, you can't see if it's below 7 degrees, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to find out from my location in Arizona what it was, and then also how much time do I need from sunset to moonset? What age moon? What's the youngest moon that I can see? The world record is supposed to be 14 hours of 2 sisters in England in the 1800s. I kind of doubt that, but that's what's written in the books, and I think most other people doubt it also, but you know, it doesn't really matter because the data is constantly being added to. I personally have never seen a moon younger than 21 hours, but with the naked eye. So I'm going to give you those values in a moment here. This is what the screen looks like, the data screen. If you've never seen that before, you're probably going to go, oh wow, what am I going to do with that? You don't need all of that, and I'll tell you, why you don't. Right now, you should write these numbers down if you think you're ever going to use this program. Important low values from my past sighting records. Moon altitude, that's the height above the horizon at sunset. I've never seen a moon that was below 7.7 degrees at sunset. The next number, the arc width, that has to do with the size of the crescent itself, how big it is, so how much light it reflects so that you can see whether it's a sliver or a little more than a sliver. The lowest arc width sighting I have ever witnessed was 0.28 minutes. That has to do like degrees, minutes, and seconds. So 0.28 minutes, that's the lowest arc width I have ever sighted, and that was very difficult, that one. I mean, I found it first with binoculars, so I knew where in the sky it was. I mean, I knew where to look generally, but at first I thought, well, I don't see anything. Let me at least see if it's there. So I cheated and looked at the binoculars and said, okay, now I can see it. Then I had 4 people around me, as I remember that night, and we all strained, and 3 of the 4 of us could see it, depending on how good your eyesight was, and that was 0.28. And I already told you moon age, 21 hours. Personally, that's the youngest moon I've ever seen. And sunset to moonset time, 39 minutes. That's the least number of minutes that I've ever seen a new moon from the time the sun set to the time the moon set. And in Arizona, the skies are very clear many days of the year. And I have actually watched some moons set to the horizon where I'm watching the ball fall below the line. So we're down to 0 degrees. But that's not at sunset. That's after the sunset time, moonset time. So I was able to, gather the information and write it down over the years. Now, the next thing you can do with this program that's useful, not necessary, but it's helpful, and I do use it, is what's called the global scan. After you enter all the data on that previous page, the software will give you a diagram such as this. It's called a parabola, under which that colored area represents every place the light of the moon is shining on the earth. And so you can look at that and say, well, any place that's underneath that is a possible sighting. Any place outside of that is not possible sighting. And as I said, I've worked with the software for years, and it's very accurate. I mean, along the edges of that, you're going to get some variation, because as you can see, it's dotted. And I'll run the program itself in a moment, and you'll see how you get some dotted edges. So as you get out to the edge of that, depending upon the location, depending upon how clear the skies are, you may or may not see it. As you get toward the center and the colors get more dense and less pixelated, you'll see it. You'll see the moon more clearly. At this point, let me go ahead and run the program for you and show you some interesting things. So we'll go to the DOS screen here in just a second. I've got to drop out of this Windows program. Now, when you first open it up, hang on a second, don't change it yet. This is what it looks like when you run a DOS program in a Windows environment. You're going to get this screen. And everything in that screen can only be run with keys, not your mouse. It's kind of small, and you go, well, I can hardly see that. So the first thing you do is you hold the Alt key down, you press Enter. So let's go ahead and do that. And that'll bring it to a full screen for you, so you can see that. On this menu here, there's different choices. I'm not going to go into all of them now. I can go over this with someone at another time, maybe an advanced thing if somebody ever wanted to do that. I've gone over some of this with some of the people in here. So the first thing we want to do is go to that number 1, and you can either bring blue up with an arrow key, or you can just push number 1, which is what I do. So let's go ahead and press number 1. And you'll notice up at the top it says Roachport. You can default this program to the city that you want, so every time it opens it comes to you. I have Scottsdale on mine, and I set this up for Roachport. On the right-hand side of the cities that come with the software, there's about 130 of them, but it will hold 1,000. So you can put a lot of locations in here. So there's a way to get the latitude and the longitude. And, the easiest way is to grab a hold of, if someone has one of those automobile GPSs, you can just push "where am I?" and it'll give you the latitude, longitude, and the elevation, and you need all of those. And then the other information you're going to need is whether the locale you have is affected by daylight savings time, and one other item that you have to put in there is how far away from Greenwich Mean Time, which is your standard time for the Earth on the zero meridian that goes through Greenwich, England. And right here you're -7. That means you have to adjust at 6 hours, excuse me. And so there's little things like that with this program comes a PDF file, a document file that you can open up and have fun spending a couple hours reading all the instructions on how to do what I was just talking about. So instructions come with it in a document file that make it easy to do. So I'm just saying, we already put Roachport in there. So what I'd like to do is go to last month's moon. So we're going to enter the data for September. So if we push the enter button for Roachport, it's going to, at the top, it's going to give us the default, and we can change it if we want. Well, 2009 is what we're in, so we'll keep that. Just press enter. The current month, we want 9 in there. So then we'll hit enter, and the date of that moon was the 19th, or the conjunction, so we'll put 19 in there and enter. And then the hour, we'll put in the 6 o'clock, 1800. And then we'll put about 30 minutes after the hour, 00 for the seconds. We don't need that, and then we're going to hit enter. And this is what we're going to get. Now you'll notice in the upper left it says Roachport. It has the latitude and longitude. It has -6 for the time zone. It's 252 feet above sea level in meters. By the way, I did this in your parking lot down here, just on the other side of the dining hall. So that's that location, which is good for this whole area. Then on the upper right, you'll see the date. It's Saturday, the 19th of September. Now it has time, which is the time for all the data here, which we have to adjust. It has apparent sunset. We want to get these 2 times together. So let's go ahead and change the 18 to a 19 on time, and we can do that with some keys. By the way, along the bottom of the screen here, let me turn this on. I'll go over there and point this out. Can you still hear me okay? Okay. Along the bottom of the screen here is instructions on hotkeys. So in order to change that hour, you go down here and you can see that in the green here it says if you use the end key and the home key, you can change the hours up or down. So we just changed the hours up and down there. And then the next thing we'll do is change the minutes. There's hotkeys for that, so we're going to change the 30 to 14 in the upper right. And the seconds, we don't need to change. We don't need to change the seconds. That they don't affect it that much, and the software sometimes won't take it. Okay, so now what we've just done is we've changed all the data on this page to match sunset. Now, if you look on the left side, in the second box, you'll see moon altitude. What's it say? 1.2. And I had you write those numbers down. The lowest elevation I've ever seen is 7.7 degrees above the horizon. So I look at this and I go, I'm not going to see that. It's only 1 degree above the horizon at sunset. Let's look at the next important item that I look at is in the same section, the second from the top, right in the bottom line in the middle, it says width. That's the arc width. And you see it says 0.69. Well, the smallest one I've ever seen is 0.28. So that's a good number. That says that's a positive. Then we're going to go over to the moon age, which is just to the right of that and up one line, and that's 29-hour moon. I've seen a 21-hour moon, so I could say I possibly could see that. And then the fourth and last item I check on this page is down in the third section from the top. On the right side, it says sunset, moonset. And that's 11 minutes. Well, you have to have at least 39 or 40 minutes. So we've got 2 positives and 2 negatives. And the negatives are big ones. So from this data, this moon cannot be seen. Let's see what the software says. We'll go to page 2. If you hit enter, you'll see in the second section in blue, it says not visible. But that's why. I mean, you could just go to not visible and trust the software, but I like to look at the numbers and say, yeah, I agree that that's why. Now, this software will give you several parameters. It'll come up and say easily visible. It'll come up and say visible if conditions are perfect. It'll come up and say possible visibility with optical aids. And it'll come up and say can be seen with optical aids only, and then it'll come up and it'll say not visible. And I like this criteria. Not all the other 12 criteria that you can set in your default will allow that. So with 5 different possible descriptions, you really kind of get used to what you're going to see and what you're not going to see. So when it says not visible, it's not visible, but I showed you why with those 4 numbers. Okay, let's see what the global scan looked like on this. So in order to do that, we escape out of this window. Number 5 on the list says global scan, so we'll push number 5. The data on that page is memorized, so we can hit the enter key a couple of times and it'll just enter the data until it asks us, do you want to see this from the day of conjunction, number 1, or from the day after conjunction, number 2? And what did we hit on this, number 2? Yeah. I did both ways. I'm going to hit the 2 key and we'll get a generated screen on this. Okay. Oh, the laser won't be seen on the video. Thanks, though. Okay, let me come over here and show you this. Now, this is the moon for last month. What you can see here is that this area is well below the equator. This is the equator right in the center of the screen here. And most of the scan is below the equator, and the bottom of this is minus 60 degrees below the equator. So that's pretty far down. I have moon reporting people in Australia, in this area, and down in this area, over here in Perth. I have people that report to me, and they didn't see it. And I'll go over why in just a minute. Then I have people that report to me from South Africa, and I don't have anybody that reports to me from South America, and I really wish I did. And then, of course, from Israel, I can get reports. I don't have any sacred name believers there, but I can get it from the Jewish people. And then you can see the United States here is not at all, it's all black, and where it is color, that's Mexico. The colors. The white area here is from 0 to 15 hours. So nobody's going to see that. I mean, historically, you're not going to see that. And then the yellow is from 15 hours to 20 hours, and the youngest moon I've ever seen is the 21, so probably nobody's going to see that, unless they're using binoculars or something. And so this is all over water anyway. And then you can see what happened on this last month. I got multiple reports from South Africa, which probably most of you know about. Not only is with South Africa in this zone, which is from 20 hours to 25 hours. This is where most of the new moons are seen, 20 hours to 25 hours. This area is not only in the grape color, but it's in the more dense. It's not over at the edge where it might be marginal. And I have reporters here in Gordons Bay. Gordons Bay is right on the tip here on the coast. And then we have brethren in Johannesburg, and then we have other sighters, probably about another 4 people in the tip there that report to us. And they've worked with me for quite a while, some of them a couple of years or more. So they know what they're doing. You know, I communicate with these people even before the day comes. I write to them and say, hey, this is what's coming up. Make sure you're out there. And they write back to me and say, yeah, okay. You know, so it's not just that once in a while get a report. I make sure I know these people, I communicate with them, sometimes even by telephone. I've talked to some of these people on the phone, the folks in Johannesburg. I try, on my website, I've asked if somebody knows anybody in South America, please get in contact with. So far, nothing. I do have one person in Panama, but I couldn't get a hold of them. I don't know if they're out of town this time, but I didn't get any report from them. Okay, so that's kind of the way it works on the global scan. Let's see, where were we going to go from here? I thought we'd go to a different time of year. You can see this is so far south, and this has happened in the last few years, as a lot of you are aware of. Let's go from September, which this was, let's go to the earlier part of the year, to March. So let's escape out of this and go back up to 1, and let's go through and let's go to the March 27th date. So we're going to change, okay. There's some shortcuts you can do here with the keys, the hotkeys on the bottom. So we're going to change the month from September to March. So you can see June, May, April, we're back to March. And then the date was 27th, so we're going to change the 26th to the 27th there. And then we've got to adjust the time to be the time of sunset. So you can see our numbers change in there. 1919, we got to get the 49 to 31 on the time. And then all our data will match. Okay. Let me come over here. Now remember the 4 numbers I gave you? We'll go to the first one. If you look up over here, moon altitude, what do you see? 15.4. Well, that's well over 7.7. So that's good. Thanks. That's a positive. We can see a moon like that. Let's go down to the width. 0.67. And we've seen, the lowest I've seen is a 0.28. That's good. Let's go over to the moon age. 32 hours. I've seen the lowest is 21. That's good. Let's go down to the sunset, moonset on the lower right, third section. 1 hour, and over here, 1 hour and 32 minutes. That's well over 39 or 40 minutes. So we've got 4 positives. We are going to see this moon. So let's go ahead and go to the global scan on this. Yeah, it says easily visible there. I'm sorry, yeah, I kind of got ahead of myself. Right up over here, where previously on the other one it said not visible, you can see now it says easily visible. Now, by the way, it also shows you the criteria. I know this is probably technical, but YALUP is whatever criteria you select in the underlying background, it's going to tell you. That's a gentleman's name who did some work for the observatory in England. Okay, now let's look at the scan on this one. We're going to select 5 for the global scan. The data is already in there, so we just have to enter on down till we get the number. I forget what we had on that. Go ahead and, yeah. Okay, this is what I wanted you to see. Now remember the previous one, everything was down here. It was September. Now we're in March. Everything's up here. We couldn't see it up there. They could see it down here. It came through and clipped a little bit of Australia and South Africa and South America. Now, this month, they're out of the picture. We're in the picture. You can see that you're all across the Soviet Union and Israel and the Caribbean and all the sightings we have there in all the United States. It's going to be easy to see. And this is the way it can change during the seasons of the year. And the reason it does this is because of the tilt of the Earth. I'll get back to that in a second. Let's go to one other time of the year. Let's split the difference and go to the summer. We were kind of like in the winter and the spring. Let's take it to a July date, July 23rd. So we'll go to the data page, we'll use our hotkeys, and we'll go up to the upper right and change it from March to July. And July 23rd is the date, then we'll change the hour. We've got to get the 22 to a 20 and the 27 to a 32 up here in this corner here. I hope you're all following me on this. Okay. And you can see on the screen up there on the left side, moon altitude, 10 degrees. That's good. It's more than 7.7, right? We look down at the arc width, 1.83. First thing you're going to say to yourself is, whoa, is this a 2-day moon or what? Because 0.28 is the minimum. Then we go over to the moon age, 46 hours. Yeah, it's almost a 2-day moon. Now, the reason that happens is for this location we've put here, which is Rocheport. Depending on where you are on the Earth, sometimes you'll miss some of that beginning part of the moon, or sometimes it's on the other side of the Earth, and it takes that long to come around almost 1.5 times before you can see it at the location you're at. So someone might see this as a 25-hour moon, but you're not going to see it because of where you are on the Earth till it comes around again at 46. Okay, so something to think about. And then let's go down to the sunset moonset, third section down on the right. The sunset moonset's 1 hour and 4 minutes, well above the 39 or 40 minute minimum. So we will see this moon. Go ahead and move to there it is, says easily visible in the second section down. So that confirms our numbers. Let's look at where this is on the global scan. Okay, so we'll go back to 5. I just go on through. Yeah. Now we were going to do, I think, 1 on this one soon. Is this, July? Go ahead. Yeah, we want the other one. Let's back out of that. Okay. I'm just giving you different varieties. You saw where the scan was low, and the folks in South Africa saw it September. We put it in March and saw where it was up high above the equator. And the scan started way out here and way up here. You notice something different, 2 things different. Number 1, yeah, this is more in the center. It's not real high above or real high below the equator as far as where the middle of this. This is where the moon is tracking. The first one, the moon was tracking down here, and then the moon was tracking up here, and now the moon's tracking about here. But look where this starts. It starts right just off the coast of Africa, doesn't start all the way over here. So what is this? Okay, what's going to happen when to me, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, I've got to give people some guidance here. I'm not going to get anything from my friends in Australia. I'm not going to get anything from my helpers in South Africa. Nobody's going to see it in Israel. Unless I know somebody in a boat in the ocean, nobody's going to see it here. The only place that really has a good sighting where it's dense is right here. And if we went out to Hawaii, which isn't on the map, I don't have any sighters in Hawaii. I wish I did. This is like Peru, northern Chile. Somebody in Peru, northern Chile, looked up and saw that moon, but they didn't call me. They don't know me. So what causes this to happen? The Earth is tilted 23 degrees, 23.5 degrees, and it rotates on that axis. And as it goes around the sun, it doesn't turn and face the sun, it keeps the tilt. So if this podium was the sun and this, my finger is the tilt, it doesn't go around like this, constantly facing it. The tilt stays like this. So when I'm here, I'm pointing to you out there, and when I'm over here, I'm pointing to you out there, and when I'm over here, I'm pointing to. It goes around like that. And because it's tilted, where the moon and the sun hit goes across the equator, goes above the equator, goes below the equator. If the Earth was straight up and down, the sun would always be right on the equator. as it went around. But because it's like this, when I'm over here, it's hitting the top, and when I'm over here, it's right on the equator, and when I'm over here, it's hitting the bottom, below the equator. And so that's why that scan moves like that. But that's what gives us our seasons. If we didn't have the tilt, we wouldn't have summer, we wouldn't have winter. Our wonderful Creator has balanced these things, and I believe He didn't just do it here on Earth. I think this whole universe is set up to keep this Earth in balance. And I mean the whole universe is for us. Not for us personally, but for this Earth. No other planet has oceans. That's a wonderful thing to think about. So what this tells us is that below that area, the light from the moon is shining on the Earth. Below this area, there is a new moon shining on the Earth. Over here, there isn't. There's not another new moon here. There's not another new moon here. There's just one new moon shining on the Earth over there. Let's go back to the slides. Now to leave this page, you just hit Alt-Enter and minimize it again. If you're playing with this on your computer at home, you can go back to where we began. And for us here, we're going to pick up our slides. So centuries ago, what was done? All ancient calendars were lunar. All ancient calendars, because that was the agricultural way. You had to know when to plant seed, you had to know when to harvest. All this was done with a lunar calendar. And the biblical calendar is a lunar calendar. The crescent was used to determine the new month by the Hebrews as far back as anybody could record. We have records show that the people in Babylon as far back as 1800, before the Common Era, used the crescent to determine the new month, and the same with the Greeks. They took experienced men who had been studying and keeping records to cite the new moon. Two or more witnesses, scriptural. Signal fires were often used to get to outlying areas. There's some stories that say that when they were in the Babylonian captivity, they still looked for the new moon in Israel and Jerusalem and used signal fires to go all the way to Babylon. And if they did, that's great. There are times when that wouldn't work, or if you didn't live along the path, you wouldn't have known that. If you lived in another area, you wouldn't see the signal fire, or if it was raining, you wouldn't have a signal fire. So it didn't always work. So there were many areas, my bottom statement there, where most people were on their own. They had to be able to determine the new month. They had to know how to do it. And I think it's important for all of us to know how to see a new moon. Remember, you don't need a computer. But Yahweh gives us things, and when He gives us things, He wants us to use them to His glory. Doctors, He gives us doctors to do medical procedures, and, you know, it's Him working through their hands. But we don't refuse to do certain things without realizing that there's a connection. Yahweh's in control of everything. So while we have it, we use it. If we don't have it, we still know how to do it without it. This is another subject which I don't really want to touch on tonight, but it's in my slides. Many cultures use the first month after the equinox to determine the moon. And I know that people know about it. The only reason I have this in there is because it has to do with the 23-degree tilt and the moon, and the sun crossing the equator. Let's go to what's currently being done. Currently, we have people who use the full moon as the new moon. I don't think anybody in here does that. But this is now, again, I want to reiterate, this is information that people gave me because I have my website and they're sending me, why are you doing it this way? I do it this way. And I try to be as polite as I can to all the different responses because, who am I? I'm just gathering information and doing the best I can. And I try to keep a good rapport with people, whether they agree with me or don't agree with me. And I've learned a lot of things from other folks when they write to me, and I appreciate that. Some people use the conjunction for the new moon. And then, of course, the crescent is the new moon, as I do and probably everybody in here does. And under the crescent as the new moon, we have 3 divisions. There may be others, but I'm just giving you what I'm familiar with from people writing to me. Some people tell me they should only accept the new moon that's seen in Jerusalem. Some people say local sightings, and some people say global sightings. For the reasons that I've heard given for each of these, the full moon, this scripture is used, Psalm 81:3, which in the American Standard Version says, blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day. Well, that makes it sound like you're blowing the trumpet at the new moon, that's the full moon. But it says on our feast day. If you look in the King James, it says blow up the trumpet in the new moon. And if you look at the word moon, it's the same word for month. We talked about that. Someone mentioned that the other day. In the time appointed on our solemn feast day. If you look at the context of this scripture, it's at the time of Passover. And it's saying to blow the trumpet in the new month at the time of our solemn feast, which kind of tells you that it's blowing the trumpet on the 15th, which in this case would be Feast of Unleavened Bread. But that's what they say is the scripture that they used. I tried to come up with pros and cons for these different positions from what I've seen. I really couldn't come up for a pro on this one. I do know that it's hard to tell when the moon is full sometimes, although it was pointed out to me from one of the brethren today that these people don't really look at the full moon to determine it. They look at when the full moon is at the horizon at sunset, which I wasn't aware of. In other words, as we were talking about the moon progressing across the sky, eventually it's going to be a full moon at just about a little bit after the sun sets. But the big thing is the second item here. The pilgrim feasts were always under a full moon. We can see that in Scripture. Yahweh provided the light for them to do what they had to do, travel, to do the things they were doing during the feast time. And if you use this method, you wouldn't have a full moon at the feast, obviously, because you'd be starting 2 weeks off. So, but that's a method that's out there. Then there's the folks that talk about the dark moon as the new moon. Well, in astronomy, that's what they call it, but that's astronomy, when everything's on that straight line. The reasons they give that they want to follow the conjunction is there's less variables, it's more precise. That's true. Calculations tell us when. Well, then you have to use calculations rather than going out and seeing it, because you can't see a black moon in a black sky. Then they mention unity. Yeah, that's true. If everybody agreed on one method, we'd all be in unity no matter what the method is. And then they also say, well, Scripture doesn't say how to determine the new moon. That's true. We have some things we can read from it, but it doesn't give us a literal description. Again, I'm giving you what people give me. Then the pros and cons I tried to come up with, well, yeah, if everybody was in unity, feast would be on the same day. But on the argumentative side of the cons, there's no ancient precedent for this. There are many places in the Scripture where it talked about getting together at the full moon for the feast. So you've got to have light. You've got to have the ability to see the new moon and crescent and identify it. So this is not really, my second point on the right is it's not a sighting if you can't see it. And it wouldn't be easy for all the people to determine. Then everybody would have to have their tables and their books and figure out, you'd all have to be scientists. So I don't think that that's very practical. Then there's reasons given for the Jerusalem-only sighting, and I have a lot of folks that write to me about this, quite a few. I'd say about every other month someone writes to me and says, what are you doing, you know? It only matters if we see the new moon in Jerusalem. And, you know, I might communicate with them depending on if they asked a question and how they wrote. In the early days, the Sanhedrin declared the new moon from Jerusalem. So I went out and looked for it, they came back and they declared the new moon because they were the men of the law that were in control at the time. In the kingdom, all direction will come from Jerusalem is another statement that they give, and that's true. And we should look to Yahweh's set-apart mountain for the witnesses who are there to instruct us. That was another statement that was given to me. I don't know who the witnesses are that are there to instruct us, but that's a statement that was given to me, and I'm just passing it on. Yes, again, you'd have unity if everyone did the feast that from Jerusalem. We'd all wait for Jerusalem to give us a report, and we'd all be on the same schedule. On the argumentative side, from what I've seen in years of doing this, not every new moon can be seen from Jerusalem, so they would miss a lot of them. Of course, then they'd say, well, it doesn't matter if you saw it because that doesn't count, so, you know, this is the new moons, but, you know, there's a moon out there, and if they don't see it, then they're not going to call it. As far as kingdom rule is not in Jerusalem right now. I have some scriptures that were given to me on this discussion, which I can pass along. John 4:21 says, "Believe me, woman, time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." Jeremiah 13:24 is more of a prophetic statement about the condition of Jerusalem. It says, I will scatter you like chaff driven by the desert. Going down a couple more scriptures, it says, because you have forgotten me and trusted in false gods, I will pull up your skirts over your face that your shame may be seen. And that section ends, woe to you, Jerusalem. How long will you be unclean? Good question. I don't believe that Jerusalem today is anything more than a secular city, politically speaking, so it's hard for Jerusalem to be what Yahweh wants it to be under the conditions that exist there today. So I wouldn't say kingdom rule right now is in Jerusalem, but I'm sure people could argue with me on that. And then on the bottom, why look elsewhere if only Jerusalem counts, which means that you and I wouldn't be looking for new moons because it wouldn't matter. And I think we should all be looking for new moons. There's a blessing in looking for new moons, number one. I know that the other day one of the brothers gave a message, Ed Brigette, I believe it was, talked about the journey of the crescent moon, and one of these things he said was Yahweh wants us all to look for new moons, and this is a group project, and I agree with that 100%. Then you have local sightings, reasons people give me to accept only a local sighting. Only recently, it says, can other locations contact us, talking about technology. Someday we may lose this communication ability, true. We must take provision at sighting new moons, all true statements. Some of the pros and cons I could see in this, less difficulty communicating short distances. Well, that's very limited. I mean, if you have to use a telephone, you're still talking to somebody that sees it and you have to take their word for it. I don't know if that matters if they're 25 miles away, you're on the phone, 100 miles away, you're on the phone, 1,000 miles away, you're on the phone. So, you still have to use the phone or the internet. On the other side, the arguments is how local is local. Some people it's regional. They might accept a few states around them. Other people, it's the whole continental United States. Other people write to me, it's the continental United States and the Caribbean. Other people tell me it's the continental United States, Caribbean, and Hawaii, and it goes on and on. So how local is local? I don't know. It depends on who you're talking to. You're still accepting someone else's sighting unless you go out and see it yourself. It's just a matter of distance. So that's kind of arbitrary, I think. The feasts will definitely end up on different dates, so there's no unity on the feast dates. That's one of the arguments against this. And this came up in the last few years. I don't know how many of you remember, but about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a sighting outside the United States of brethren who were connected with assemblies inside the United States, and they called and said that they had seen it, and were told that, well, it's not the new moon because we didn't see it here. And I think they got rather upset about that, because that went back and forth for a few weeks afterwards. There seems to be a U.S. dominance of the internet. So it's like, you know, they're probably with brethren, especially if they're associated with our assemblies. Now there's the global sightings. Well, in relation to what we just said, no brethren feel second class because they're outside of the United States, and their sightings are rejected. Other statements that have been given by folks who want to do it this way: there's no scriptural literal instruction on how sightings are to be done. In other words, the scripture doesn't tell us it should be only local or only in Jerusalem. And you know, really, that generally speaking, there is not a lot of guidance about this in the scripture. We can see that they saw the new moon, but it doesn't really say specifically, this is the rules for new moon sightings. So that's why we're having these discussions. We have to try to figure it out. And then the last item, wherever the proponents of this would give, is wherever the new moon is first sighted is the new moon. And what they're referring to there is that pattern that we saw on the screen, where it's underneath that pattern is where the light of the new moon shines on the earth. And that's the new moon to the earth. To the earth as a whole, that's the new moon. Outside of that, there isn't another new moon. That's the statement for that. Pros and cons. Well, concerning the statement we just talked about with participation and everybody in the body of Messiah looking for new moons, this global sighting would give you the most participation with unity. And what that means is, if you have a Jerusalem-only sighting, there's no participation, because no one else can go look for a new moon. It won't matter. If you have the conjunction sighting, where it's the dark moon, you won't be looking for new moons, because it won't matter, because you can't see it, and some scientific tables will tell you. So there's no participation in that either. I think it's the most participation statement here means that at different times of the year, at different places on the earth, everybody gets to participate at some time, because the thing moves around, as you saw on the chart. Everybody gets to participate in seeing the new moon, getting the blessing of seeing the new moon, calling in and telling the brethren that they see the new moon. So, and of course, as the others, if everybody accepted that method, there would be unity, just as with the others. Of course, everyone would do the feasts on the same day, and then you wouldn't have any disparaging possibilities existing between assemblies. Of course, all the assemblies would be equal, but that's just until Yahshua returns to Jerusalem. Then he would tell us what the rules really are and how that would go. And of course, as in the other ones, you have to have telephone, you have to have the internet, unless you're just going to be your own assembly. And then you're going to really have a lot of different feast dates if every assembly did it just when they saw the new moon. And lastly, there's a couple of closing comments I'd like to make. One of the brothers here did say to me, you know, Rich, he said, when Yahshua returns, and a lot of people think that might be around trumpets, when the new moon is sighted on that first day of the 7th month, is he going to come one day in one place and another day in another place? I said, you know, that's a good thought. That's a really good thought. And what hit me when he said that was that pattern that showed where the moon was showing on the earth. And I often thought, you know, when you hear the trumpet, for years I've thought, is that sound going to be heard all around the earth at once? You know, how it's got to be something supernatural. I don't think we're going to hear the trumpet at one part of the earth and then people have to wait the next day to hear the trumpet there, or, probably a lot of you have thought of the same thing. How's that going to work? And I kind of thought when he said this, that's a good thought. When Yahweh returns, Yahshua returns, is he going to return one day here and another day there? And that's interesting thought. And then the last slide here is about the walking it out, as I talked about, halakha. There is a Jewish story that goes along with this, and that was that, you probably have heard it, some of you, that they would do the bris, the circumcision, on a child on the 8th day. And if the 8th day fell on the Sabbath, there was some consternation for the priests, because if they were to do the circumcision on the Sabbath, to them that was work. And were they to work on the Sabbath or not work on the Sabbath? So they had to walk it out. There was no place in the scripture that they could go to that was going to give them the answer to that question the way they wanted it answered, sharp and clear. They had to get together and figure out how they were going to handle this. And so I have a picture of these two gentlemen walking along, discussing something that they have to work out. And that's where the idiom halakha comes from in Hebrew. You're going to have to figure this out, guys. You're going to have to walk together, hand in hand, or side by side, and you're going to have to make it work. And however you come up with it, you have to respect each other and try to do what you think is best in Yahweh's eyes, and try to have unity and not division, and above all, peace. So find out what's best for the most people and doesn't violate Scripture. That's basically what it means to walk it out, I think, scripturally speaking. Find out what's best for the most people and doesn't violate Scripture. And if people get along and agree on something in that manner, then I think Yahweh will bless us. Thank you.